I'm pleased to introduce Richard Stacker, Industrial and Logistics CEO here at Charter Hall, as well as Amelia Kelaher, Head of Investor Communications and Marketing for the Direct team, who will be discussing the industrial and logistics market and exploring some of the key drivers of demand across the sector.
Thank you, Steve. A range of factors continue to drive significant tenant demand across the I&L sector as the fundamentals remain strong. However, the RBA's aggressive raising of the cash rate has slowed transaction volumes and has ramifications for capital values. I'm here today talking to Richard Stacker, Industrial and Logistics CEO for Charter Hall, to understand this resilient tenant demand in the context of broader property market headwinds. Welcome, Richard. Let's start with tenant demand. It's at historical highs. What do you see as the key drivers?
Yep, there's been some very good thematics in the industrial logistics sector which have really driven its growth over the last 4 or 5 years. The things that we've really seen, which have been the longer term growth for the Australian economy, is around the population growth. And if you think about it, for every person that comes into this country and effectively need things, they're going to buy things, have things delivered to them, we need industrial space. So what we have seen with the population growth and the population growth forecast to be about another 2 million people over the next 5 years, that equates to about 4 square metres per person. So in total, that's about 8 million additional square metres of space. That's a lot of sheds we're going to need to meet just that population growth. So that's one thematic. The second thematic we've really seen is this drive to online retail spending. And between now and 2027, we're going to see growth in online retail from about 13% currently of total retail spend to about 23%. Now that's going to equate to about another 4 million square metres of warehouse space that's needed to meet that online retail demand. So in total, just between those two thematics alone, is about 12 million additional square metres of space over the next 4 to 5 years. And when you think about that in the context of the total industrial market, that's well over 10% of the existing space. So, that's significant demand which will continue to drive the sector. Another large thematic we've seen is really the move to automation. And a lot of tenant customers have seen that opportunity, particularly in a very tightly constrained labour market where it's been hard to get labour and the cost of labour has been going up. So there's been a real drive for additional automation into warehouses, and that generally requires a new warehouse to put that automation in there. So that has been driving the sector, and we believe that will continue to do so over the next 10 odd years as well.
The tenant demand is clearly a positive, but does heightened tenant demand make I&L property immune from macroeconomic factors? For example, rising interest rates?
Yeah, it's a great question, Amelia, particularly in the current environment where there has been a lot of uncertainty and probably into 2024 will continue. What we have seen in the industrial logistics sector is vacancy rates at record lows. So vacancy around the country is basically below 1%. So significant occupancy, basically most warehouses are full around the country. And when you can compare that to in a global context, just to give everybody a feel, Australia has the lowest industrial and logistics vacancy globally. So logistics is in great shape if you think about those sort of market fundamentals. The other thing we're not seeing is a huge amount of supply come into the market, which generally is the other thing that will push vacancy up and potentially change the dynamics in the sector. So look, we expect that balance between demand and supply to be pretty good over the next few years. And particularly, even if the demand starts to slow, which we do expect off the back of a slowing economy, fundamentally, we're still a long way away from equilibrium. Like in most markets, a balanced market is somewhere around 5% vacancy. It would take a lot of additional space being given up by tenants to get anywhere near that. And I talked about the thematics earlier, like if we have another need for about 10% of additional warehouse space just to meet those thematics I talked about, I think we're going to see a very good, over the medium to long term, very good industrial and logistics market. So I think, yes, fundamentally things are a little tougher economically, macroeconomics, but I think more broadly that will probably play out into valuations and where they may go for the sector.
Back to the fundamentals of an industrial and logistics portfolio. What does the team here at Charter Hall focus on when curating portfolios? Are there challenges as well as benefits associated with long WALE?
Yeah, look, I think it's a good question on how we think about a portfolio, because for us, it's all about the quality of the asset, its location. For industrial logistics, being close to key transport infrastructure is critical. That's where tenants need to be. Their transport costs is probably one of the highest costs of actually running a logistics business. The rent is probably somewhat smaller as a percentage of their total costs. So location critical, obviously the quality of the assets. So when I say quality, it's warehouse clearance, it's drive around access, all those sorts of things are very important when we think about what assets we want to hold for the longer term. Therefore, what we look to curate is generally more secondary property. Things that we don't think we can reposition and add value to are those that we would generally curate. In terms of longer versus shorter, it's a really good question, because I talked to obviously the valuation impact of probably longer leased assets in the question before, and not being able to access that rental reversion as quickly. But there are some real benefits to longer leased assets. They tend to be higher quality property. They tend to be with tenant customers where they see that location and that asset is very strategic. Hence they take a longer leased asset. I think the other benefit of longer leased assets is if the market does shift and vacancy comes back in, you've got a period where potentially when other properties may be vacant, you're occupied, so you have no impact to your actual rental property income coming in. So some benefits, I think, for long lease assets. Yes, in the current environment where we're seeing market rents probably moving quicker than the fixed increases under leases at the moment, you might want some shorter leased assets, but it does come with some risk. So a balance, I think, within a portfolio is the right way to go.
Finally, many of our investors are very interested in the sustainability of our portfolios. What are some of the ESG highlights and challenges for industrial property? And is there much difference between the assets we acquire versus those that we develop?
Yeah, I think for us, obviously ESG is very important in terms of how we think about our key stakeholders, and that includes not just our investors but our tenant customers. Tenants are far more engaged now than they ever have been in thinking about how they're going to meet environmental targets they've set, particularly around emissions. So what we are seeing in this space is tenants have set some pretty high targets in terms of emission reductions, and part of that equation is looking at what they can do with their energy. On the energy side, they can reduce it with clean power, and so what we are seeing is a lot of tenants looking at solar and putting solar on warehouse roofs. And if you think about the scale of some of these warehouse roofs and what you can generate from having solar panels on them in terms of energy, it could be very significant. So a lot of engagement from tenants there. And just to give you a feel, Charter Hall by the end of 2023 will have actually put close to 50 megawatts of solar on our industrial and logistics rooftops. So that 50 megawatts of solar actually translates to about 90,000 solar panels. And that's the equivalent of powering about 9,000 homes. So pretty significant in terms of what we are doing in the space to not only help tenants meet the targets, but also from an environmental perspective, very positive. The other things we do in this environmental space, a lot of water harvesting. So once again, big rooftops allow us to collect a lot of water when it rains. We have a lot of areas where we can harvest that water, and that's a positive for tenants in terms of the use of grey water for gardens and obviously within their own facilities in the warehouses. It's not just environmental though what we look at, we're very much focused on the social side, and if you think about during the pandemic, a lot of the workers in the warehouses were considered essential workers. If they hadn't been at work, you wouldn't have got things delivered to not just your house but into the storefronts, particularly food. And to that end, that put a lot of pressure on those logistics drivers. We saw that and what that impact on mental health was. So we partnered with a group called Healthy Heads and Trucks and Sheds to raise awareness for mental health for logistics workers and what they can do to help their mental state. So they're the things we are looking at in ESG.
Thank you, Richard, for joining us today. It's been an interesting insight into the key drivers and themes, and it's been great to hear firsthand from the head of the sector here at Charter Hall.
Thanks, Amelia.
I'm sure our investors have also found this conversation informative, and I encourage anyone to contact our team if you have any questions after listening.
Thank you, Richard, for those invaluable insights into the industrial and logistics market. It's clear that there are tailwinds that are strong despite the volatile capital market conditions that we're experiencing across the property sector today. That concludes our industrial and logistics update. Thank you for joining us today, and if you have any further questions, please get in contact with our team who'll be more than happy to assist.